Did you kill innocent people?
Come on.
Hello, and welcome to our Last of Us HBO Spoilercast, where each week we'll be reacting to the latest episode and talking in depth about what we've watched. I'm Phil, or AK Black and Red, and on this channel I talk about The Last of Us a lot, along with other survival and horror themed video games. So if that's your thing, then be sure to subscribe. This week, I am joined by Emily, a traditional and digital artist whose Last of Us themed art you can check out on her Twitter via the link in the description. And Will, who runs Resident Evil Central on Twitter, largest Resident Evil fan account, and my co-host for the Horror Game of the Year Awards, which you should definitely stay tuned for because we will be announcing a winner very soon.
Oh, yes.
As the name implies, spoilers lie ahead for the fourth episode of the HBO series The Last of Us, so if you haven't watched it yet, then I highly recommend you do that before listening to this or watching this. You don't have to have played the game to be able to follow along, although be aware that there will be mention of where things echo or diverge from the game up to this point. So with all that out of the way, let's dive into the thing that we're all here for. So we've just seen episode 4, which I all of a sudden can't remember the episode name. Take Hold, Please Hold My Hand.
Yep.
Yeah, that was it. So picking on Will first, do you want to kind of give your overall impressions, general review, thoughts?
Yeah, I think we're slowly building up to obviously something big, aren't we? And you can see that the relationship between Ellie and Joel developing, and it goes through different aspects. So you've got the fun and joyous side, and then obviously the big shock within it. So it's really testing them, and you can see their relationship building up and up. But overall, no, it was a fantastic episode. And yeah.
Cool. How about yourself, Emily? Thoughts?
I really, really enjoyed it. I think it was, obviously you want to compare it to the game when you talk about like how you enjoy it, but like when you're at this point in the story, it really feels like it's really starting. And I think like the way that they're portraying the blooming relationship between Joel and Ellie is done really well. I'm really happy with how content and happy they are to like be around each other, even though it's like Joel might be a little bit annoyed and Ellie kind of picks at him and whatnot. But it really feels like they're really starting to become just a pairing that we love to see. So yeah, I really liked it.
Yeah. And I think it was, at this point, I think the shortest episode that we've had so far was about 45 minutes. It was like there and gone, like sort of, it was like, oh, is that the end of it? But there was an awful lot in there in terms of obviously forward momentum we got from where we were in Billstown and everything that happened all the way up to Kansas City, and we've introduced new characters and a new dynamic and a threat going on in there, and that's all been done really well in a way that kind of still centers Joel and Ellie's relationship. And like you say, just kind of comparing it to the games, you kind of go in one way and sort of going, oh, well, this might happen. And you see some of those moments where the same dialogue beats come in. But also, I think the moments where they go differently, like the way it's portrayed on screen, I think Pedro's Joel is the same character, and I think they got the same character traits, but the evolution we're seeing in a different way through the TV medium. And I think the thing that will always stick for me for that episode is that last, just before we meet Henry and Sam at the end, that last moment where Ellie tells the joke about diarrhea being hereditary, and then they just break into a fit of giggles, and everything about that was just like so genuinely heartwarming in the middle of everything that's going on. That I think that's the thing that will stick with me the most out of all of that, because you just, it almost, I'm sure it was scripted, but it almost felt like that was something that had just happened where they were trying to film it and Joel trying to be like steely faced, and then because Pedro Pascal is who he is, he just broke down, and they just basically it's the way they act in interviews as well. So I think that was the other thing that made it feel, or like if you've seen Pedro and Bella kind of interacting with each other, it just felt exactly like that. So yeah, that's the moment that sticks out, but shorter than the other episodes. And I think there's always part of you watch these shows that when it ends, you're like, no, I want more now. But I think where we've left it has left me very much hungering for episode 5 as well, which we will obviously talk about a bit later on. But I think so we can talk about in the episode in more depth now. So just kind of a recap. Obviously, after Tessa's death in episode 2, we saw in episode 3 Joel took sole charge of escorting Ellie. They arrived in Billstown, and then we had one of the most heartfelt and gut-wrenching love stories that I've ever watched, I think. And then they acquired a truck and weapons and supplies to move on. And then before we got to that point, there was moments between Joel and Ellie that kind of shaped their relationship and their feelings about what's happened. And obviously, we saw some of the history of what happened in the outbreak and how it acted in episode 3. And then in this episode, we are now obviously on the actual road, and coming back to Emily's point, like the story feels like it's properly getting going. The actual journey is moving forward. But we're also seeing a lot more kind of fleshing out, not so much of how the outbreak happened, but also of who they are as people and what's happened to the people in there. So that kind of brings us, I suppose, the very first scene we get is very much reminiscent of Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver, when he stands the whole sort of front of the mirror with a gun scene with Ellie, after she obviously stole it last episode. So I'm curious to kind of see how you two are interpreting that, and particularly in relation to what we saw last week with the infected and the little kind of incision that she did before stabbing it when she found it, and whether those two things kind of are related about how she's viewing this world that she's been thrust into, and anything there.
I think her immunities made her in this show a lot more cocky. I think because she's not fully experienced the outside world, if you will. It's leading her to think that she can take on everything, and I think this episode really cemented to her that she's not ready and she really needs Joel.
Yeah.
Like I think the interest now of like what actually is the infection is kind of like weighing on her, because like obviously she knows what it's capable of, just the black and white bits of it, of like you get bit, you turn into an infected, and that's all it is. But like since she can kind of come onto one head on like that, where it's just like vulnerable in the ground, it's not moving, it can't attack her, she can like actually get face to face with it and like see it as like this tangible thing, and she can like look at it and be like, that's what's kind of going on inside of me, but not in the way that it would happen to everybody else. And so I like the point that you made about how like she's probably a little bit cocky compared to like how we typically know Ellie because of the way Bella's portraying her. But I think like it's more of an interest, like I was saying, rather than sort of like a taste of like violence, like vengeance for it, that people were kind of pointing at towards episode 1 with the way Joel like defended her and everything. I think it's a lot of curiosity, and then like you were pointing out, her response to Joel killing the guy that she shot, like she really doesn't know what she's in for, because like you said, like she was only ever in the QZ, and now she's like actually living this rather than living around it.
Yeah. I've seen like comments saying about, obviously the three of us haven't played the games and everything, know kind of what happened to Ellie before in terms of like the Left Behind story that is good, like TV viewers are going to see in episode 8, I believe. But without going into any kind of depth about obviously that moment, there's a lot of kind of hint there that whatever it was that happened and how she got bit has kind of led to that feeling of powerlessness, and this is kind of her trying to reclaim that, and like that feeling of seeing Joel as the protector and being able to like do that, like to someone basically beat a man to death and then kind of wanting that for herself to be able to have that kind of power in a world that she's coming more and more to realize is very cold and ruthless. And it's got that weird kind of balance between there's obviously a level of tragedy there in this dark, quite adult world, but then there's also the side of Ellie, obviously that's still a child in many ways, which is where in the very next scene when she comes out and Joel's siphoning gas from the car, we see she pulls out the joke book. There's a couple of scenes from the joke book, and then later on when they're camping, and then at the end, as we mentioned before, sort of as they go and sleep, and Ellie tells these jokes, and they're the same jokes that we've seen. Like if you play the game, and there's certain points where they come up as optional conversations, and you can activate the joke book. But the delivery and kind of the way they interact with them compared to like Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson's performances, they're both obviously very fun in their own ways, the game version and this version, but they're also different in a lot of ways that speak to, I think, the versions of them that we're seeing. So like it feels like, I don't know, like if you agree to say, it feels like Joel is kind of softening to this a lot faster. I mean, part of that might be the TV format, but certainly softening to it a lot faster than Joel was in the games.
Yeah, I think like they're definitely utilizing, obviously like it's an optional thing like you said. I think they're utilizing it in such a perfect way because they're only given, what is it, 9 episodes to cover the whole story. So they're thinking of ways probably to adapt the relationship much more than what we actually see in the games, because like obviously the games have the freedom to be as long as they want them to be, and depending on how the player wants to play the game would depend on how long the story actually runs for. But I think with the show, they're taking all these like optional bits and using them to progress the relationship quicker. And I think there's going to be more points where it might set them back a bit. Like obviously, like when Ellie reveals that she's had a gun the whole time, instead of Joel getting mad at her, he softens up, teaches her how to use it. He doesn't get angry. There's no like weird not weird, but there's no like awkwardness between them after that. It's more of just like, okay, Ellie, you stole this thing, not happy about it, but I'm gonna let you have your way with it. Like I think making those little changes make more room for like more setbacks later on, but it develops them a lot faster than what we typically know them to be as.
Yeah, and I mean with that, I feel that works in the context of it, because again, I think Joel would be a lot harder to relate to as a character on TV if he killed as many people as he does in the game, because that's just very different. So it's still able to show us that the brutality of the world without it Joel feeling like this completely alien, unrelatable character. He feels relatable, because again, TV audiences are not going to sort of take to, I think, no matter how many times they may have watched The Walking Dead or whatever else, it's still a horrifying concept just seeing someone commit those things, which would be like absolutely normal to us. It's like, oh, it's just part of the game. We were just playing along. But I think how did like you feel about that with, because those two things I think tie together with how he softens up to the jokes and then coming to the gun and like the reaction, like the fight obviously, and the ambush kind of merges two parts of what was Pittsburgh in the game together, where we got the part where he's being drowned and then Ellie saves and shoots, but in this version she doesn't kill the guy, like, and then Joel is kind of a lot more remorseful about the fact that she's had to do that to intervene. How are you feeling about that in terms of how it working for you and like what it says about Joel's character and how it speaks to their relationship?
Well, I think it's obviously the distance of time from between when Joel obviously lost his daughter to now and what he's gone through. He's probably not had this humorous side from someone like Ellie. So he's gradually warming up to it. And obviously the situations that they've gone through, where obviously he was almost killed, it's made him realise that he needs Ellie a lot more than he expected. and I think that that relationship like immediately blossomed at that point. And as you say, like when you were, he didn't get mad about holding the gun. He showed her how to use it. They obviously need each other so much that it's. I think it's bringing the more human side out of Joel.
Yeah. Emily, anything you want to add in there, or?
I'm thinking about it a bit. I think like you were saying, like it kind of brought the humanity back to Joel, because like when was the last time he would have ever been around a kid Ellie's age with so much life to her, because she hasn't been fully affected by the world since it's like the only thing she's ever known. And like she's kind of been fortunate enough in a weird way to have been in a like the Fedra school and in the QZ, so she still had a bit of like a stable upbringing to what that world allows her to have. And like Joel's only interaction with kids otherwise would have been like how we saw him having to, burn a child's dead body because of, they got bit. But I think he'd probably be very confused by the situation, since he's the only person he's ever really allowed in was Tess. And him and Tess have always kind of been survivalists, just trying to get by every day. The work that they would do together was very dark. Like they were smugglers, they were doing drugs, they were drinking, they weren't having a proper life. And so having Ellie, who is the complete opposite of that, it's like something that he kind of needed without ever thinking he'd ever need again. And like I think him reacting to like her jokes and like her silliness and her quirks is like such a I'm trying to think of the word, but it's such like a complete like shock to him, because it's been so long since he would have had any of that.
Yeah. And we do actually find a lot more about kind of his backstory here as well, because we had that moment. Again, I've skipping back and forth in different bits rather than kind of talking it chronologically, because I think it fits together. Certain moments fit better together in terms of the conversation. But where they're walking up, like, and Ellie is asking him about how he knew about the ambush, and like asks whether he's killed innocent people, and there's that kind of moment of silence, which is obviously a lot more thoughtful and contemplative than the game version, where he just kind of grunts, and then Ellie says, "I'll take that as a yes," and he's like, "Take that however you want," and it's more dismissive. But that also fits into we know a lot more about that now, because the kind of general thing, it was people kind of go, "Oh well, Joel and Tommy were hunters before they at the earliest part of the outbreak," and whereas what we know now is that Joel and Tommy and Tess were part of a group that were going towards Boston, and obviously they had to do things to survive, which included ambushing and killing innocent people to steal their stuff. Although it's not that explicitly, we kind of get that impression, and it's. Do we think that like kind of like what how do you feel about kind of what we know about it from what we've been told in the show, as far as the backstory goes, and how it kind of, I think it gives a slightly different impression to the way that the fewer details we get in the game certainly build possibly a different picture.
I think it just builds a picture that Joel is a lot more scrappy, and he's had to do a lot more bad things to obviously get through to where he is now. As that scene in the obviously going up the stairs dictates and shows us how much it like that how that conversation plays out. It really shows like a darker side, I think, to how he's got there.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more of a realistic approach to like where he'd actually be, considering all the consequences of the outbreak and what he's been through. Like those little moments, like you were saying, like him going up the stairs, or like his body like physically not being able to handle as much running away and escaping and surviving as you would think. Like in the game, obviously you're playing as this person who can eat a 20-year-old granola bar and be fine, but like with the show, like they're really capitalizing on someone who has just lived, and it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel as if you're train of thought. It just makes sense, and it feels right to see him react so like harsh to how he has to get his way through this. and like Ellie obviously like reacting to him being like just old and like having a hard time with it. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I've got to be honest. I'm with Joel on this. Like walking up that many flights of stairs, my knees would be playing havoc as well. I'm not quite, approaching 50 yet, but even so, uh, but yeah, and so we'll kind of come back to and we'll come back to like the arrival in Kansas City in a minute, and obviously everything that we're introduced to in there in terms of new characters, but just kind of picking up that thread as well. The other part of that is this Joel's hearing problem in his left ear and everything else, and that leads to this one sort of fatal moment because we see the end. He kind of falls asleep on the side where he can hear, and then he's rolled over at some point so he doesn't hear them being snuck up on. And I think it really does speak to, again, you're talking about the way they've adapted this, and I think a lot of people, like particularly a lot of people before the show started, sort of saying, "Oh, all they have to do to adapt this is just basically reenact the cutscenes," and it obviously that was never the story because there was so much more in the gameplay. But I'm keep kind of coming back to just how much they've done, and we shouldn't really be surprised by this, I suppose. But there's been so many bad adaptations of so many video games, and obviously me and Will as Resident Evil fans, I think have felt that pain quite keenly.
Oh god, yeah.
But like that balance between kind of taking the stuff that's there in the original source material and using it when it's exactly perfect and it suits, and changing it because it's not a game and it does need to flow differently or be more realistic to a TV story that someone's not got controller in the hand. Like it feels like they've not really set a foot wrong as far as that, and it all kind of manages to feed into the same story beats. It doesn't ever feel like, at least so far, like there's nothing like where they've made a change and you think, oh, later on they're going to have written themselves into a corner. It all feels like it fits.
No, definitely. I think watching it as well, it doesn't feel video gamey at all. If you hadn't have said this is a video game adaptation, it would just come across as a fantastic series. And I think that's what a lot of video game adaptations get wrong, is that they try and take too much from the game, like try and use the exact scripts and the exact moments that just don't work in real life. So yeah, no, I think they've done a great job with the more realistic side, and as you said, twisting the story parts to make sense is to strike for gold, I think.
mm-hmm. I think needing to eliminate all because if you're just going on YouTube and you're just watching the game just with the cutscenes, you're only watching about 2.5 hours worth of content, and so when they're eliminating all these gameplay moments, it's that kind of just adds so much more room to develop them even further. So when we were talking about Joel having clear health issues and physical incapabilities because of his age and what he's lived through, at it, as much as I would have loved to see them, climbing on a dumpster to get to a spot to continue moving forward, it's that stuff's kind of just not needed whatsoever. Even with showing them traveling more so and then getting their way through a city, but cutting the fat around what else would be there. So including the new storyline with Kathleen. Yeah, of course, maybe there would have been a point where Joel and Ellie would have had to fight more people, but it just makes more sense to have them get around those situations to continue to develop them further.
Yeah, and again, I don't think the Pedro Pascal Joel who struggled to climb up that many flights of stairs would have been meeting Henry and Sam the way he did in the game by shimmying along a ledge outside of a house. I don't think I would have bought that.
No.
Well, yeah. Let's talk about that because we've kind of. I don't think there's too much to say about some of the scenes that are basically 1-to-1 in terms of the banter in the car over the audio tape and the magazine, and then kind of the actual ambush. Obviously, was barring the kind of using. I think they used an old bus in the game to ram them off the road. it obviously was not quite as grand as that, but it still kind of did a lot of the same stuff. But then all of that introduces us to these new characters. We've got Kathleen, played by Melanie Linsky, and we've got Harry, who is, I'm reading as like her right hand man or second in command. Obviously played by Jeffrey Pierce, who plays Tommy in the video games. And then the hunters, who are like sort of got more of a WLF from part 2 kind of vibe to them to some degrees in this, because they're not just, I mean, they are doing the whole sort of anyone who comes in will rob them and ambush them and stuff, but they've also seemed to at least be trying to tell themselves that they've got a purpose and a mission behind it beyond just that kind of scavenging survival thing. So, I mean, yeah, if we start there with thoughts on kind of the new characters and how they're portrayed and what you've liked about them and other thoughts.
I think like introducing this sort of pseudo WLF version of the hunters is pretty good, because like it gives them more of a purpose and more of a reason for like Joel and Ellie to like have to fight them and get around them, which we'll probably see later. And like the inclusion of like Henry has a purpose towards them as well, rather than just being a guy trying to get away with his brother. Like it does so much more justice to like adding to it, rather because like we just know the hunters is just like an enemy that you have to get by that's not infected. But like knowing that they probably recently overthrown Fedra, and like what Fedra's like, obviously we know Fedra to be very like they're very fascists and they're not, the best people, the best version of the government that you'd want lasting in a world like this. But I think giving even just the antagonists more meaning and then figuring out why they're the way they are later on really helps it a lot.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that like about Kathleen's character in particular is that this kind of, in terms of, if for anyone who's familiar with the law and like sort of with the stuff that you find around Pittsburgh and the notes and stuff, there's one note which is like kind of a mother who's lost a son, and I think this is the character that kind of has been expanded into Kathleen, although it's a brother in her case, but talking about kind of how that kind of spurred her on to fight against Fedra and the revenge of that, and like then obviously become a lot more. And you can see that in like everything there. She's obviously doing very bad things, and she's basically setting out to hunt these two brothers, one of whom's a kid, and kill them. But then what she's telling herself and telling others is that they've done something wrong, and they need to be brought to justice, and everything's kind of brought that way. And I think that definitely feels a lot more real, because like that whole idea that no one's a mustache twirling villain. Even people who do absolutely abominable things can justify it to themselves internally. They think they're the good guys, and that kind of comes back. I mean, obviously that's something I suspect when we get to the season 2 adaptation and everything else, we'll probably see a lot more played into. But certainly, I think that makes more compelling villains and even scarier ones as well. Particularly someone like that who's got this kind of gentle facade but then all of a sudden there's this steel underneath, and like the moment with the doctor and everything else, where she kind of comes back, and when she realizes that, what's the kid's name who was calling for his mum? He kept saying it over and over again. The one who Joel has to kill.
I don't want to say it wasn't Brian, was it? No.
It might. That's sort of sounds familiar.
I feel like I've seen that name float around.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. But when she realizes like he can't be saved, that's when it's sort of like, no, well, we don't need a doctor then. And that's just sort of goes instantly from sort of, I'm pleading with you because I'm trying to just this coldness, and I think that's terrifying. That sort of thing, and that switch that people can do, that's so much more terrifying than someone who's like, Negan in The Walking Dead, who's just pure, like, choose the scenery. As much as I love that character, like,
yeah.
there's something.
Yeah, Yeah, you think she's got a lot of control, obviously, from the initial reaction with the doctor, but as you said, like there's just that switch, and it's just that right. That's it, done. It's it really amps up that evil side. You think, oh, they've got a bit of a human side, and then no, still cold and evil.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to make like the relationship between Kathleen and Perry. I mean, there's obviously something there, and he defers to her, but she also asks his advice. But there's also some sort of tension there. I felt between them in terms of he's following the decisions, but there's something there where he's kind of unsure about stuff, particularly when we see obviously the rubble in the ground and the shaking underneath the building.
Yeah, no, it's all a cover up, isn't it? There's something they're hiding from everyone that they know about.
Yeah, but like, I mean, what do you guys make of that relationship in terms of like, is there gonna be a rift there, or is that tension gonna be kind of resolved in some way? Do we think?
I think with what we know to come, obviously new viewers don't, but I think this is a sort of a small setup for what the story becomes later on, where it's like the consequences of someone's actions and how everyone else around them feels about it, and how like the one person, obviously Kathleen's thing has to do with her brother of some sort, but like the people closest to her are kind of unsure about her motivations and like her priorities, and setting those straight, and like how that's going to affect everyone else later on, like the greater good of because clearly she's leading the way of some kind, but like you have this threat underground, but also the threat of like whatever the hell else is going on around them, and like whatever Henry might have done, all that kind of thing. Like it's only going to lead them to some sort of disaster because she's driven by her emotion rather than the logic of like protecting everyone else. That like whatever we see happen next, I don't think will be good.
Oh,
Yeah. I was going to say this to later, but actually, like, kind of thoughts on this, because we've seen like previews of episode 5, and we know kind of what's coming out of the ground in terms of infected creature, the bloater. But something I was thinking about, because thinking about the episode order, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like next episode is going to be the last one in Kansas City, and then 6 is where they reach Jackson, I think.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So in terms of game order, that kind of means like we won't necessarily have time to do that whole sort of suburbs and sewers section that would have come kind of after you come out to Pittsburgh. You go into the sewers, and then like there's all the stuff that's underground, but there's also notes and hints about people trying to survive in that situation. Again, I'm trying to keep this vague just to not give it away in case it does go into more depth in there. But I'm kind of like starting to wonder if those two things, they'll connect those two things in the show, and like the way they'll do it in the lore is kind of that community that we only knew through notes, like which was led by a guy called Ish, and what's coming from underground. Those two things will kind of we'll see something that shows that they're related in terms of like basically that they became this threat that's looming under the surface, or is that just me?
it's a tricky one because as we've seen from the different episodes, they can fit so much into such a little episode, but then also concentrate on essentially one story throughout an entire episode. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they do manage to put all that together.
Yeah, I've got kind of an idea brewing in my head of like kind of how something which in the game was like a later section, which it doesn't look like we'll actually visit on its own, will kind of be woven back into this part, which was, I think, essentially just it wasn't even part of the story. It was more just a level, because you go underground in the hotel and you have to fight your way out of that sort of hotel basement area, and it doesn't have any actual story implications, whereas what you see underground in the sewers later does. So they could easily pull that back and put it into that story. But yeah, we'll if I'm right, I will gloat about it in the next episode. So before, because there's a couple of other little points I want to kind of touch on, but any more thoughts on Kansas City faction and anything there that we haven't kind of already talked about in terms of the characters and motivations and anything that we interesting that we're drawing out from that?
No, I don't think so. Really, I think we have covered the main points. Really, as to say, like they're obviously hiding something, and that's going to have really big implications for them.
Yeah, and I am very much looking forward to see how that plays out.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other thing I wanted to kind of come back to as well, again, I don't think we can really talk about the cliffhanger without spoiling too much, because obviously, if you watch the show and you've not played the games, you don't necessarily know who these two characters are who've just kind of snuck up on Joel and Ellie, whereas we do, and we know what happens next. So, like I say, I don't think there's really too much we can say there. Although I am interested to see why they're wearing the like kind of like warrior face paint.
There was those drawings that
Yeah.
Sam had done, which I'm assuming is what you were gonna say.
Yeah.
I can imagine Sam, Henry would, if in the case that Sam is putting this face paint on because he is a superhero in his mind, like I feel like Henry would be a little more lighthearted, especially considering the situation of which now Sam is deaf. He would be a lot more gentler to him in his imagination rather than in the games where he's a lot more hardened, but still like a brotherly figure to him where like they bond and they're connected, but like he doesn't have as much faith in him in the games. I can see them changing that up where Henry is very positive and optimistic towards him and getting him through it. And like he probably doesn't fully comprehend the situation since he's actually younger, but like I can imagine Henry has a lot more positivity towards him and letting him explore these things that he would have never otherwise got to experience.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that way. I was just kind of like, why is he painted his face?
Yeah. No. They made him a little bit younger as well, because in the games, isn't he quite similar to Ellie's age? Whereas obviously with all these comic book drawings and stuff, he seems a bit younger.
Yeah, is the actor younger?
Yeah, I believe the youngest he is at least 8 years old.
Yeah, so that's going to be a different because he's like 13, I think, at that point in the game.
So I think that does that'll add a different dynamic, I think.
Yeah, because it's not like a teen; it's like a child. So, and that obviously is a lot more perilous situation with everything that's happening as well. Going back a little, the other kind of thing I want to talk on when we're talking about characterization and like how the narrative kind of is giving us who these characters are in different ways is, although he's not in this episode, we do get a fair insight into Tommy's character as well, in terms of the backstory that Joel gives. Now, we knew he was with Joel and Tess, and they were making their way to Boston, and then he ended up joining the Fireflies, which was kind of already there anyway. But we've also got a lot more there in terms of Tommy as someone who wants to see himself as a hero. Like he joined the army to go to Iraq in Operation Desert Storm because of the time frame, and then joined the Fireflies for the same reason, and kind of a lot of that. So we're particularly in part one, like there's the only kind of real thing that we see of Tommy is that kind of opening bit, and then we see him briefly in in the dam outside of Jackson, and kind of he's got the conflict with Joel, but there's not sort of too much deeper beyond that, beyond just speaking to what Joel's done. But I think certainly from what we see of how Tommy's character evolves into the second game as well, it's very interesting the way they've kind of laid out his motivations for how, like, the choices he makes in life.
I think that because in the game we obviously see him talk about like the direct quote is like his cause is his family now, because he was able to find that purpose outside of the Fireflies and outside of the whole goal that they had. And obviously when that didn't work out for him, to him in the game it probably would have been a conflict he had to deal with, but then the reward of Jackson and Maria and what that came for him, I feel like now with the game or the show, sorry, it'll still probably delve into that, but maybe in a more rational approach because of Jackson is actually like a sustainable community. It's thriving. They're doing okay. Like I think that naivety it seemed that Tommy had about the going to the military and Fireflies and whatever, I feel like makes it makes him feel, from what we've seen and what we know now, a lot more like maybe he's going to be a lot more of a rational person rather than what Joel would typically describe him as. Even though it seems like their relationship ended on a good note, it's just something happened where they lost connection.
Yeah. There's something like it's not quite the same, but there's certainly that there is some level of conflict because I remember him saying to Marlene, like, "You're the reason you took my brother away from me," or something to that effect, and he kind of is viewing it as probably in the same way as when he had to bail him out of jail at the start of episode 1. Is sort of, well, now he's out on his own. He's obviously in trouble. I've not got to go and rescue my reckless little brother, and certainly he views him as trying to be a hero all the time, and that's what gets him in trouble. And then it'll be kind of how much that is reality and how much that's just kind of Joel's big brother head on that, I think.
Yeah, I think it's all to do with hope as well. That obviously Tommy having all these different missions, it gives him that hope that he's given him his life that purpose, whereas Joel sort of diverted down the opposite path where he was just surviving and the whole hope of saving humanity is gone. So I think that's probably where they've diverted.
Yeah.
And that's where their disconnect was. Whereas Joel, at one point, seems to think that everything's just hopeless and it's just all about survival.
Yeah, and that whole kind of line of like, why go on if you don't think there's hope? You go on
Exactly.
for family kind of thing.
Mm.
Although actually that kind of brings me back to one other thing I forgot to mention earlier, from when, after saying that, Joel says that Ellie's not family, she's cargo, but then later on, after she's asking what's out there in the world, we then see that he stays up all night and stands guard at the camp. So I think that's the first sort of thing where we realise kind of what his actual true feelings are at that point versus what he's saying out loud.
Even the cargo line was a little bit sarcastic because like Pedro's version of Joel seems very like dry humor, and so like Ellie makes the joke to him about coffee and how it smells like burnt shit, and he like goes to drink it, but he's like slurping on it really hard, and then like they have the conversation about family and that sort of thing. So I feel like like the way they showed it in the trailers and stuff, it feels a lot more like Game Joel, where he's colder and he's kind of just so over the whole thing anyway. But I feel like, and interpreting it as if he's just like saying a sarcastic comment, and then we see him kind of keeping guard and watching over. It's like that's the true Joel, rather than him making this like one-hand comment and Ellie's kind of like whatever about it after. I think that's at least a way to look at it, but also just like speaks to what you were saying, like how Joel actually may feel about the situation in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we didn't do it in chronological order. I think we jumped about a lot, but I think we've covered kind of pretty much everything that happened in terms of the plot points of that episode and a lot of there. So before we move on, are there any other just general points or anything we might have missed in details, or anything that you want to pull out of what we saw in that episode and talk about?
I think my biggest takeaway was when they're obviously going up the tallest building, going up the stairs. In the game, the conversation that Joel and Ellie have is a bit more lighthearted in the way that Joel answers that question of did he kill innocent people. It's sort of just brushed off, and it's like, I'll take that as a yes. Whereas, obviously, in the show, it's a lot more deep, and it's a lot more it's a lot more human, isn't it? In the way that Ellie's obviously takes a step back, realizing that this man that she's with, the only savior that she's got at the moment, is this has a side of being a cold, brutal killer. And I really like how they've made it less video gamey, a lot more human in that kind of side of things with the conversations and stuff.
Yeah, giving a lot more weight to everything that. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about yourself, Emily? Any other points you want to draw on from the episode?
Yeah, I think the whole point of The Last of Us in general is like it's a human drama, but in place of a world where like it's void of pretty much any life. So it's like the infected and the pandemic and everything is like secondary to what is actually going on. And I feel like the show is doing a really good job at that as well because it's not like there's the threat of the infected, but it's so much more focused on like the consequences of what people became because of that and like possibly their true colors and like what has always been a part of everyone in the world and it only would be come to be because of a threat like this. Um and I've seen like the critiques go around from people who've clearly never played the game of like this is a zombie show. Where are the zombies? They're not zombies first of all, but like I just like that they're really doing the game justice in the way of like it's about people at the end of the day and it's not like they're not doing too much like shock value with like infected and like obviously had the infected focus episode of 2 but in general I appreciate that they're not just doing stuff just for the sake of like we could show how threatening this all is but at the end of the day like it's about us, it's not about everything else going on.
Yeah, we don't need a half an hour sequence of Joel creeping around, stabbing things in the neck. The whole thing. It's I think that's where video game adaptations go wrong as well. Is they try and make these huge grandeur action sequences, thinking that's what we want, and it's not. We want the characters. We want the story. We want to know everything about these characters. But yeah, no, the way that they've gone around with the show, it's just they've, as you said, like they can have the effect, the impact of the horror of all the different creatures, but only have it in small snippets to give the characters the room to breathe and expand and give us more as the video game fans.
Yeah, and I think that point like is probably the kind of main one as well as like when people sort of saying, I mean, I'm kind of more forgiving of it when people say it like jokingly when they were talking about episode 3 and going like, why did the zombie show make me feel feelings or whatever, and that's fine. But when people are using that to kind of critique the show from a point of view which it never stood for in the first place, as it's supposed to be a zombie show and this sort of thing, whereas I think even in the games, like most of the enemies you fight are human throughout all of it. You get some sequences in certain areas where you fight lots of infected, but they are definitely like a much smaller segment than I think people kind of remember. So much more of it is about fighting humans and that sort of thing. And I keep comparing it to The Walking Dead, but the reason I'd like is because this is another place where they do similar things in terms of using that apocalypse and the kind of infection and everything that happens as kind of a backdrop to look at human character interactions and the human condition and everything else. But obviously, Walking Dead does it in a very sensationalized way that still relies on that spectacle of the masses of zombies and all this sort of thing. Whereas The Last of Us, I think, is certainly a lot better at having that just sort of fade enough into the background that you can focus on those human stories and you can see, like, going back to Bill in episode 3 and Bill and Frank's story, we get one sort of establishing shot where there are zombies killed by a trap. We get one scene where there's raiders outside, and that's enough to establish that those things are occurrences in everyday life. We don't need them in every 5 minutes just to remind us that they exist, that they're there. But then it's right. This is what's happening in spite of all that. This is what people are doing, kind of to cope with that and to build the life around it. And I think a lot of it's in bad faith, particularly some of the criticism that we've seen since episode 3 and some of the people who've been doing things like the review bombings and stuff, but it's whether deliberately or just because they're not able to see the wood for the trees, but there's a lot of overlooking of that and kind of this thing is about these monsters that humans turn into. I want to see more of that and have this like big spectacle. It's like that was never what The Last of Us was.
No.
It's also just in the name as well. I mean, obviously all the comparisons from like the general public are going to go back to The Walking Dead because The Walking Dead was the only other like prolific like zombie media that we had. But like The Last of Us is literally in the title, like The Last of Us. Like it's about humanity. You go to The Walking Dead and with The Walking Dead, you obviously get like aspects of that as well, but like you were saying, like the background of like what's driving the majority of the story is like you have these walkers going around and like you see these massive hordes of them and like they're literally always a threat when it's like even with The Last of Us, like even the type of infection that it is, it's something that you can relate to more as well. Like it's a parasitic infection, it's fungus. It's not something that I believe The Walking Dead, I probably am going to get this wrong, but it's something of like a meteor, some sort of spore had come down and then infected. I don't know what exactly it was. It's not obviously the same, but it's not the same type of thing. It feels more relatable to like just human life and like the constant threats we have of like illnesses and stuff. Like you you come to The Last of Us for that. You don't come to it because you like killing the infected. Like there's so much more there.
Yeah. With the walk, I don't know what it's done in the show because I stopped watching after a certain point, but they never really explained it in the comic. But from memory, one of the ways that like Robert Kirkman sold the comic to like the publishers, to say it was different than all the other things about zombies, was to say, oh, it's going to be the twist at the end is going to be it's caused by aliens. And that caused them to like snatch it up and say, yeah, we'll publish it. And it was a lie. He just basically like pulled that out of his arse. But that, which has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but just fun little side fact. So that's how we got The Walking Dead. Lies about aliens. But yeah, I always think it's interesting. I mean, it's infuriating as well. I think like because it's been fun seeing a lot of the takes and a lot of discussions like that people are having about the show as it's going on, and particularly new people discovering it. But at the same time, that's always interspersed with all the people who just like can't read media and what it's supposed to be about, or taking it for their own agendas and this sort of thing. And I think it is worth pulling it back to know this is what it is actually about. It's about human beings. The rest is backdrop. You know, as fun and spectacular and terrifying as it'll be to see like the clickers and the bloaters and everything else, that's the setting. They're the setting. They're not the they're not the drivers of the plot. They're the scenery. So yeah, I mean, if that like I think probably brings us around to kind of everything we want to say on episode 4. But just to kind of cover and mention some things that have been in terms of news related to The Last of Us since the last episode of the podcast. So this episode, because this show is continuing to grow week on week, so this episode had 7.5 million viewers, and that was a 17% increase on episode 3, which in turn was like 22% on episode 2, and or something like that. So every single week, this is like growing big, which is fantastic, given that it like had I think the second biggest opening of any HBO show ever like already. So it's just becoming this huge spectacle, and it's also I think reached the point now as well where far more people have seen this TV show, The Last of Us, than will have ever played the games in terms of numbers.
Yeah, no, I think the power of the word of mouth, you can clearly see what's going on. Initially, obviously, the video game fans first started to watch it, and then obviously as they've talked about it to their friends and stuff, you can see the impact it's got. And then in turn, as you've seen from the video game sales, people want to explore how it actually happened in the games, and then it'll just be this huge vacuum that just keeps on increasing, I think.
Well, speaking of the games, the other kind of 2 bits of news that we've had. One is that the PC port of The Last of Us Part 1 is now going to be released on the 28th of March rather than the 3rd of March, so it's been delayed slightly. So I don't think, I mean, because I think if it released on the 3rd of March, it would have probably roughly coincided with, where are we? 5, 6, so 7 episodes in, so there would have been 2 episodes left, whereas now it'll be like a week after the show's finished.
I think YouTube can definitely attest to this, but I've had so many people in my life come to me now talking about how they're watching the show purely because like everywhere on my social media is just art related to The Last of Us. And they like it just because it's art and they know me and whatever. But like now that they actually get what's happening, they're coming up to me saying like, "Oh my god, like I'm experiencing this, whatever." And like a lot of them want to play the game now as well. So I think like the word of mouth and like just the power of like having everyone come together one day a week to watch something that, like, if they had released this show in the binge model, it would not strike the way that it has been for so many people. And so I'm very glad that they're doing it like this, because just look at the increase and look how much spectacle it's getting every week.
Yeah, it's the center of conversation constantly. I mean, to the point where I basically have to absent myself from social media on a Monday till I can get home and actually watch the thing. Just
Yeah.
because I can't, with other things, be staying up till 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning by the time it's finished to watch it. So, but it's just even like sort of much later in the week, it's still the center of conversation. It's still the main thing you see on Twitter and TikTok and everywhere else. Is like everyone's just talking about it. And I think that's I'd almost forgotten how fun that was when you enjoy something and it's that conversation that's ongoing, because like I think we're so used to that, just binge everything in 1 week and it's gone, and then and move on to the next thing. Like
It's quite, yeah.
as much as the wait can be frustrating, like it is definitely, I think, one of the best parts of it.
Oh, no, definitely, and it's a good conversation to have as well. You're not negatively talking about something like, "Oh, this is absolutely trash." It's like it's so good. Like I've got people at work that keep coming talking to me about it now, and they've never played video games. They're like, "Oh, if you watched The Last of Us, I've started to watch this," and I'm like, "Yeah,
If you like that, there's a game.
yeah."
So yeah, and I think it'll be really interesting to see once the PC port comes out. I'm hoping that does well, because kind of my hope from that is that we then get a PC port of Part 2, which coincides with a full PS5 upgrade, which improves the loading times and everything else. So, but I think
I think it
being
will.
straight after the show is going to help it massively.
Yeah,
I like I get why they would want to delay the release, obviously, because it's like there's probably like the final touches that they have to make on it, like with bugs and everything. But like it's also pretty cool that like it's gonna be out by the time the show will be over. So like by the time all these new fans have come in and like they want to play it, it's like they can tackle it immediately, and by the time they finish it, the show will probably be done, because I can imagine a lot of these people, this is their first time ever really playing a game like this. So it's perfect.
Yeah. I'm wondering also if there's something big happening in that episode where people are going to talk more about the episode than they would about the game release on PC. So they're giving the show the full time for it to breathe and everyone to talk about and explore it, and then they can come and play the game after.
Yeah. Although I also want the game to release less. Although I won't be able to play it myself because my PC is not good enough for that sort of thing. It will be fun to see, because there's inevitably going to be mods to be able to like play the game as like Pedro and Bella's version of Joel and Ellie, and with like all that sort of stuff built in, and it just, I think a lot of that's going to be so fun to see when it finally comes out. As well as obviously playing where like Joel is Kratos or Spider-Man or whoever else. The other game related thing that we've had is only rumors, but we keep getting them periodically. But the rumors are circulating again that The Last of Us Part 3 is in development now. But I think this sort of ties into, we talked about previously about the rumors about the show being renewed for a second season, and now we've had that confirmed, and we know they're going to be adapting The Last of Us Part 2 next year at the earliest, but still relatively soon. So that then begs the question of whether we'll reach a point where they'll be ready to tell a new story, like on HBO. Will that coincide with the release of a game as well?
Yeah.
They've committed to the fact that, and I've seen it said somewhere, I'd have to go back and find it, but I'm just paraphrasing. But they have confirmed that like they're not gonna exceed the show past what the games currently have available. So like even if like part 3 isn't for like God knows how long, like I can imagine that they would probably hold off on releasing like further seasons past the second one until that would come to be. But I think now it's like I mean like there's always like the rumor about part 3 and then like Neil saying like, "Oh, like we have an outline, but we're not working on it. We don't know." It's like he's a liar. You know it. You know it's happening.
Yeah. Oh god, yeah.
He's such a liar, but it'll come to be whenever. I personally don't think it'll be yet. I feel like letting this is getting kind of off topic now, but letting part 2 kind of digest and then slowly going back to it because of how hard hitting the ending was. Like, however they decide to do it with the show, I can't see fitting all into one season. I feel like part 2 will be 2 seasons or 2.5 something.
Yeah. I thought I'd seen something somewhere where they were talking. It's a vision of 4 seasons for the Last of Us TV show. So I'm wondering if, yeah, as you say, like they'll expand part 2 to be 2 seasons, and then obviously whatever that mystery 4th season could potentially be, part 3, or
Yeah.
maybe factions could be turned into something. I don't know.
Yeah. Like a
You never
spin-off or
know.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we should see more about that game as well this year. So hopefully, which just for if there is anyone watching who's not played any of the games, there was a multiplayer called Factions attached to the first game, which was basically 4v4. You choose a faction, either Fireflies or Hunters, and then you kind of play out this 12-week campaign with them, and then play the campaign on the other side, and it kind of in this deathmatch format. But they're now expanding this multiplayer game, which is going to be a lot bigger and a lot more story based and set in San Francisco. I think I'm pretty sure
Yeah,
the Golden Gate
rings a
Bridge
bell.
was in the background of like one of the concept arts. So we should be hearing more about that this year. But obviously they're keeping tight-lipped, and we know. I mean, it's a good thing, despite the conspiracy theories that result from it. But it is a good thing because it means we don't get spoilers too early. But we also know that Neil is very, very good at lying to our faces about what's coming. Just like, nope, none of that's going to happen. Or is it?
Yeah, because I'm wondering if they'll drop something. You know, when their season finishes, I wonder if they will drop an announcement of some sort at the very end.
If they're able to, I think that'd be very good market and very good timing.
Yeah, when you're considering the viewership's going up and up and up, you're going to maximize it. Like The Last of Us finale, you can imagine the viewership that will pull in at that time, and that would be the perfect opportunity to announce something of some sort. Maybe a Factions trailer, or you don't know. You never know what he's thinking.
I bet. I know they mentioned that 2023 would be the year that they talk about it more. Whether the release is like end of the year, next year, whatever. But it's like I think it's literally the perfect timing to have some sort of multiplayer release, because it's like people are gonna want to play the games and want so much more out of it that it's like, okay, to hold you over for the rest of the story, here's something you could do with your friends while also experiencing another campaign story like that. I think that'll be fantastic.
Yeah.
So this doesn't really count as news so much, but last thing on this before we kind of talk briefly about what we want from episode 5. The Saturday Night Live segment that Pedro Pascal did, where he did the Last of Us styled Mario trailer.
It works so well.
Is it only me that wants to see that movie, or
No?
It looks so good.
I mean, there was also part of me that was looking and thinking, we've already had this movie. You start Bob Hoskins, and which I will die on a hill that was a good movie. It was a terrible adaptation, but that was a good movie. In a so bad it's good way, admittedly, but still. But yeah, that's I think kind of where episode 3 of the show had me like reduced to tears out of like pure sadness and heartbreak. That had me reduced to tears out of just like hysterics. But anyway, so kind of rounding things up then. Episode 5 is going to be more in Kansas City. We've got like the conclusion of episode 4, so you've got to find out more about whether Kathleen and Perry will catch up with Henry and Sam, whether they'll catch up with Joel and Ellie, what's going to happen with what's underneath the surface. Any predictions or hopes as far as that, anything particular you want to see, or anything that you just think this is likely to happen?
Really, I really wonder how they're gonna change it in the way, because like there's obviously that conversation we see Sam and Ellie have about, you know, being scared and like ending up alone and like their biggest fears and stuff. So I wonder how moments like that are gonna adapt considering the circumstance of Sam now, and how they'll decide to handle a disability in that sort of way, because I've never, at least I can't think at the top of my head, but The Last of Us doesn't have any sort of representation for disability of that sort. So I'd be really curious to see if how they're going to go about that, and how, like, if that's going to change the way of Sam and Henry's inevitable death. Sorry to spoil this, Spoilercast, whatever. But it's not that it's something I'm like honestly dreading a bit, because I don't want to have to see something that's going to be so tragic. But I think I just want to. I'm very excited to see even how Henry and Joel interact with each other, the backstory that they're giving to Henry, possibly maybe even incorporating how like they ended up in the situation that they're in, like their parents, whatever that may be.
It's just occurred to me while you were saying that as well, and talking about the representation of disability, that we've got no reason to believe that Joel or Ellie know ASL, so there's no way that they can communicate directly with Sam, as far as we're aware, which potentially adds all sorts of other dynamics to all the kind of tragedy that we know is to come. So it'll be interesting to see how they do that, or whether they have to find some other way to communicate, or it's not like if you're not got like certainly this is the case in the UK, I think, but like unless you've got reason to learn it because you've got like family members or friends, like most people generally go through their lives don't learn sign language, like certainly voluntarily. I imagine that's the case in most places, which
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had to learn a little bit because of the setting that the school I'm in were quite special educational needs. So I've learned bits of Makaton and stuff to communicate with the younger children. But as I say, if someone, I couldn't efficiently communicate, but
Yeah, it's never been something, at least for me, that's ever been like integrated into any sort of elementary or high school education, which is honestly very disappointing. I think that at least in Canada, like we have French as a second language to learn, and other options for other languages as well in like school curriculums, and obviously post-secondary, but like it's unfortunate that it's not something that is so like readily available to like every person to like know. So however they decide to do it in the show, which like obviously there is ways to still communicate with somebody with that limited way of communicating, but yeah.
I think it presents an interesting kind of barrier for, again, Ellie in particular to overcome. But yeah, so that's where we'll see. That again brings me on to just to mention, like, I do think that's my one big prediction, is that the community that was in the sewers outside of Pittsburgh that we meet, or we don't meet, that we see the notes of, who like set up their own like community in the school and everything, and then it all went wrong because they got infected and killed, and then turned into like the infected that you have to face as you're going through that section. I think we're probably likely to see that as being directly under Pittsburgh, and like one of them obviously becoming a bloater in whatever time span they've had to do it, and that's part of what will rise up. And I think because I'm pretty sure Craig Mazin made a reference to like that story somehow being incorporated into the show. So in my head, that's how it would be best to kind of tie that to what's happening in Kansas City and the surface stuff. We will find out if I'm right.
it does make sense. So I think you've probably got it right.
Aye, it'll be, yeah. On that note as well, just to mention, so episode 5, because the Super Bowl is would have clashed with the normal time, so episode 5 will be showing early. So anyone who is expecting to watch this on Monday, you will get the chance to watch it. I think in the US and Canada, it'll be on the Friday evening at whatever time it normally plays, and then for us in the UK, it's 2 a.m. on Saturday. So we get to see it a couple of days early and get to experience all of that. So just to be aware of. So if the wait's too much, you can watch it early. But yeah, that's kind of, I think, pretty much everything this week. So before we kind of wrap up and go, if you guys want to just briefly tell people again where they can find you and anything that you've got coming up that might be of particular interest or that you want to plug. Will?
Yeah. Well, you can find me on majority of the different social medias via Resident Evil Central. Beginning of next week, we've got a couple of streams that I've got planned. We're going to be streaming some. I think Last Day of Lazarus, and then I'll be doing a few unboxings. Capcom Europe sent over some stuff. I've got some stuff from Intel, and then at some point in the next couple of weeks, we'll be looking at the Resident Evil Food Project in collaboration with the Game Flavor with their new Resident Evil drink release. So, yeah, got a lot of coming up.
Cool. Emily, what about yourself? Is it all the gigantic Abby painting, or is there anything else you got in the pipeline?
Kind of on the back burner right now since I'm back at school. Usually I work on her on weekends, but that's still in the works. So, if you want to check me out on Twitter at Guacamole, you're more than welcome to do that, and on Instagram at Art by Guacamole. In the meantime, just other drawings. You'll probably see some HBO things here and there, some Ellie and Abby stuff, as I tend to usually do. Even some school projects as well I have working on. So yeah, nothing too crazy, but same old Abby. You'll see her on the weekends.
Cool, good stuff. And I will find a way to get a print of that on my wall. So yeah, thanks again to my guests, and make sure you check out the links in the description and show them some support and love, and follow them wherever you follow people on whatever platforms you prefer to use. If you've enjoyed the podcast, then give it a like and consider subscribing to keep up to date with all my content, including future episodes of the podcast, other videos on The Last of Us, Resident Evil, and horror gaming, and my live streams where I'm currently running Whole Game Permadeath on The Last of Us Part 2. And then I am intending to keep doing this until I can beat both games back to back without dying one day.
Insane.
Check out the links in the description to join my Patreon for as little as £1 per month, or donate to my GoFundMe and get your name in the credits of my videos, like those at the end of this video, who, as ever, I want to thank for supporting me and my content. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.